Thought for 20s. $250,000. For a fence I set with my own hands and a chicken coop my late wife loved. Yeah, that happened. And the letter said I was trespassing on community land. I've mowed longer than some of my neighbors have been alive. You can laugh if you want. But I stood there in my driveway with a certified envelope that felt heavier than a brick and realized somebody thought a 71-year-old man was going to roll over and hand them his past. His piece, his property, you know what I mean, and that's when I decided they'd picked the wrong old neighbor to bully. Let me back up a sec. My name's Frank Dalton. I've been on this 8-acre patch since the county road was gravel and the sky at night was still dark enough to count satellites. My dad showed me the corner irons himself back when men shook hands on boundary lines and meant it. So when the Sunset Ridge HOA sent me a glossy violation packet, illegal fence beyond the line, unauthorized structures, encroachment on green space, printed in gold ink like a wedding invitation, I knew the smell of nonsense before I even tore it open. And the smell got stronger when their president, a woman named Sloan Whitaker, clicked across my driveway in heels that hated gravel and announced, clipboard high like a scepter, that she was documenting my violations before legal action. She walked my place like she owned it. Fence, garden, tool shed, the coop. Point. All violations, all coming down. And when I held up my 1973 deed and the original plat, she waved a manicured hand and said, "Those papers are irrelevant. We have modern surveys." Well, ma'am, that's cute. Because the only modern thing about what was happening was the price tag on her sunglasses. My neighbor across the street, Marla Jensen, wandered over and said she'd watched my fence sit in that exact spot for 25 years. Sloan smiled like a cat at a bird bath and told us we were confused, then promised liens, forced sales. The works if I didn't comply in 30 days. Here's the part people miss. Intimidation only works on someone who hasn't spent 40-plus years measuring truth with steel and math. I'm a retired surveyor, which means I know where dirt ends and rights begin. So that evening I pulled my old gear from the garage, GPS rover, prism pole, metal detector, stakes, and walked my corners under a sky the color of a bruise. The coordinates didn't just look good. They sang. My fence was right where it belonged. And then my detector chirped where no one expected it to. I found an original iron pin swallowed under a berm of expensive landscaping. Then another. And a picture started forming that made my hands shake. My land extended well past my fence. And on the far side of those buried corners sat Sloan's mirror-flat tennis court and her glass-edge pool, like a posture lesson in blue tile. I called Noah Briggs, the best independent surveyor still taking coffee at sunrise, laid it out for him. Buried irons, a suspicious 2010 survey. Mansions raised after the development went in, and he went quiet. The way a man does when his brain locks onto something ugly. "Frank," he said, "if that survey exists the way they say, we're going to prove what's true with instruments that don't care who drives what." 3 weeks, full boundary retrace, GPS base stations, ground-penetrating radar, the works. Week 1, we set control, tied into state plane, checked my deed calls against satellite fixes. Every day the maps sharpened, and with it my suspicion. By week 2 we were pulling stakes like bones out of a shallow grave. Original irons 2 and 3 feet down, tucked under hedges. Right where my father said they'd be, and each time a pin hit daylight Noah sighed that low surveyor's sigh that means this wasn't an oops. This was a choice. Sloan paced her kitchen on the phone. Tried to charm Noah with questions about his license. He handed her a card with the state seal. She went pale the way a person does when the script changes and they weren't warned. Then came the part you're not ready for. Trent Sawyer's 4-car garage and circular driveway. Absolutely not on Trent's lot. Lydia Park's master suite cantilevered like a magazine over my legal description. Cole Harrington's outdoor kitchen, pizza oven and all, anchored in my soil. Paige Lowell's postcard lawn and wedding cake fountain sitting cheerful as a swan on acreage tied to my deed. And Sloan's precious pool and court. Every glossy square inch. On me, not her. The signatures didn't match any licensed surveyor in the state, and the coordinate set didn't balance. You can't fake closures without math tattling. I took our findings to a property attorney named Laura Kane, and the woman smiled like a welder, sparks in her voice. Recorded deeds are the Constitution out here, she said. HOA bylaws can't trump a properly filed grant from 50 years ago. She filed a quiet title and asked the court to declare boundaries by deed and verified survey. Sloan answered with the legal equivalent of a temper tantrum. Fraud claims, harassment claims, even elder abuse, because apparently being stubborn at 71 is a crime. Meanwhile, Marla started jogging memory across the street, talking to older residents who remembered construction crews, updating lines, moving my markers, calling it progress. And here's our twist. The county recorder's office had a clerk, Ethan Rhodes, a young guy who grew up on a ranch and still wears the boots. He called Laura after hours and said, "Off the record, you didn't hear this from me, but there's a memo from way back that a development consultant normalized boundaries during permitting. He couldn't leak it, but he pointed us to the right public requests and the right boxes to inspect. We made the requests. The paper trail appeared, and it wasn't pretty." Sloan thought she'd kill the thing at an HOA meeting, so she staged one like a tribunal. Projector, attorneys in $1,000 suits, the whole theater. She opened with glossy photos of my violations and an expert who talked about community harmony, like that meant something to a deed. Then she called me up, expecting a confession. Instead, Noah plugged in the laptop and painted the room with a drone shot. Boundary lines overlaid in beef red, gasps sucked the oxygen out of the place. Every line sliced through what the rich folks thought was theirs. Sloan's pool glowed like a jewel. In my backyard, Trent's driveway curled like a ribbon on my land. Lydia's spa suite floated over my meets and bounds, one slide after another, coordinates, photos, control points. And when their lawyer called GPS unreliable, Noah did a live fix that matched the original irons within an inch. Math has no politics, I said, and a deed doesn't care about your mortgage. Chaos, calls to lawyers, neighbors arguing value and blame. Sloan insisting we were delusional, while her reflection trembled in the blown-up image of her pool pinned to my parcel. We packed the gear and went home. And the next morning Laura's voice was steady as bedrock. Trial is coming. The judge is tough. That's good. Truth likes tough. 8 months of filings turned my dining table into a cartographer's altar. The courthouse smelled like old paper and coffee. Judge Alana Ruiz ran a tight room and let the science talk. Sloan's side argued drift and custom and accepted use. Noah walked the jury through how multi-constellation GNSS works, satellites, fixed bases, ground control, redundancies, then laid the original stakes on a foam board like a forensic pathologist. Ethan testified to the public records we'd lawfully pulled. Marla told the simple truth about men with hard hats easing corner irons into new holes back when the mansion sprouted. And when I took the stand, I said what my father told me once under a hot June sun: property lines aren't feelings, they're lines. We mark them so people can live next to each other without knives. The jury took 2 days, the longest weekend of my life. Then the foreman stood and the judge read a ruling that felt like a plumb line dropping through a crooked house, when verified by licensed professionals and reconciled to recorded deeds. GPS coordinates are irrefutable for boundary location. Mr. Dalton's ownership is established by a preponderance of evidence that cannot be reasonably challenged. There were cheers, there were curses. There were phones out to capture Sloan's face as the math diced her confidence into little polite squares. Damages came next. 15 years of unauthorized use, fair rental values, injunctive relief, options to pay rent or tear out what trespassed, and a bright line precedent that recorded deeds supersede HOA bylaws. Full stop. People ask about revenge like it's a dessert, sweet at first, regret later. I'm not built that way. I took the court's remedy and did business. Sloan pays monthly to keep that shimmering pool where it is. Small checks. Big lesson. Trent rents the footprint of his garage. Lydia leases the bedroom wing. Cole's outdoor kitchen now serves steaks on a deck that acknowledges me as landlord where it crosses the line. Paige moved her fountain home and rents a sliver of access across my frontage so her walk makes sense. Marla became my unofficial property manager because she can talk honey from bees. We started a little community garden on a corner of the land I reclaimed, and once a year Noah and I run a verification survey with a crowd of curious neighbors watching the rover beep, laughing when the screen locks and everyone can see exactly what it saw last year. Truth that doesn't budge. Sloane changed. I won't pretend she became a saint. But something in her posture softened once the rent checks began. She asks advice now, before she lays a new fence post near the line, invites me to walk it with her. No cameras, no lawyers. Just two neighbors and a string line in the dust. And sometimes we talk about how progress gets used as a stick to pry things loose from people who don't speak fluent money, not to agree. Just to keep the air from souring again. So that's the story. An old man, a deed older than most of the roofs in the subdivision, a line of iron buried on purpose and found on principle. Instruments that don't take bribes, a courtroom where math beat theater, and a neighborhood that learned the oldest lesson on the American ledger. That boundaries are promises we keep for the living and the dead. You can see the last shot if you close your eyes, dusk rolling in. The tennis court lights humming to life across a property line that finally means what it says. The pool throwing fish scale reflections against Sloane's glass, while my rooster pecks along the grass on my side like he's counting acres. And me standing on the porch with a coffee I didn't earn with spite, just stubbornness. Listening to a town quiet down under a sky dark enough to count satellites again. Now tell me, was justice served, or did the court go too far? Should the rich be allowed to buy their way out of mistakes, or should the line hold no matter what's been built on the wrong side of it? Drop your take below. Share where you stand on right versus convenient, on community peace versus personal rights. And if you've ever fought a bully with a rulebook, I want to hear that fight, too. Because stories like this don't end at a verdict, they live wherever neighbors agree that fairness isn't a luxury item. It's the ground we stand on together.